I sat down on it and 3 weeks in the hospital. Anyway, we were talking about before, right, that trends in powerlifting and programming, and the topic came up about accommodating resistance. I think a good place to start is explaining what that means, why you're a fan of, and then why you're a fan of it, and why and when you would put it into a program.
Okay. I think if anyone knows what it is right now, they probably know of it from Westside using bands and chains. The idea is that the accommodating resistance works with the strength curve. So you think about when you're squatting in the hole, when you're benching off the chest or deadlifting off the floor, that should be some of the weakest points based on physics. Now everyone's a little bit different, but like those should be basically your weakest points. So by adding bands or chains, what you're doing is at those points, the bands and chains are either deloaded into the floor or aren't being stretched. So you're not feeling the weight, you're only feeling the weight on the bar. But as you squat up or press up or stand up from the deadlift, the chains start to come off the floor, so you feel more weight, or the bands start to be stretched more, so you feel more weight. So, you know, like the big one that Westside does that people mostly know is like the speed work. They'll add bands on, they'll do 40, 50, 60%-ish of their max, but they'll add bands and they'll try to move it as fast as humanly possible. That way at their chest, let's say for bench, you know, 40% on the bar, but maybe they've got 25% band tension on there. At lockout, it'll feel like 65%, but on the chest, it might only feel like 45%. So they can blast it and then but then what happens is too, if you're doing speed work without the resistance, it's really rough on the joints because you have to slow down a little bit at end range or you'll slam your joints into each other. So like, you know, locking out the elbow, you're on a pipe or extending, you'll smash the joint together. The bands and chains help to resist that because you don't have to slow down. They're slowing you down for you. So you can still apply full force, let the bands and chains slow you down so you don't hurt your joints, and still push as hard as you can. Where, like I said, if you do it without that, even if you don't realize you're doing it, you're going to slow down a little bit so you're not in pain. The next day, your joints will feel it if you don't have that accommodating resistance on the bar. In the land of home workouts right now, bands are huge because that's what people have access to. And it's good and bad. It's good because at least it gives you some extra resistance, but like, you know, when you're doing a goblet squat holding a band, it you know, at the bottom, it's probably no tension at all. At the top, it might be 40, 50 pounds. So it's more than nothing, but it's not ideal. You know, maybe if you have some chains, if you do like a curl with it, like, you know, when you first start to bend the elbow, it might be 10 pounds. At the top, it might be 30 pounds. So it's something, it's more than nothing, but it's not ideal. Weights would still be better. I like accommodating resistance with the bar a lot. I like the Westside method with it. We go a little bit heavier, being primarily raw lifters. So I'll usually add about 10% to the bar from what they do, and still try to move it quickly. But they also do more heavy stuff that we don't do as much, where they'll load the weight up and have, you know, lots of chain or heavy band tension, so it feels like a max lift. You know, so maybe at lockout, you know, they used to do some. I remember reading like the old stuff, the circle maximal days, where they're like, the squat at the top is like 1,200 pounds, but at the bottom it's like 600. But they've got like, you know, 2 or 3 strong bands per side, so they can still get off the box fairly quickly, and then the tension kicks in and it just becomes harder. So you can't shut it down. You have to try hard throughout the whole rep, or you're in trouble. Because unlike with straight weight, where like if straight weight you might get to a sticking point, you might be able to fight through it. With a band, if you hit a sticking point, you stop. You're not going again. Because it's going to push you back down. So once acceleration's at 0, the lift is over, where you might be able to figure it out on straight weight. So it teaches you a few things. It teaches you how to grind through a lift with the heavy stuff. It teaches you how to accelerate the full way, how to be fast. It teaches you how to finish a lift, to stay with it right through the end. So I like it. I think it helps a lot. It's one of those things that we were, talking in our trend episode that like, it's not trendy now. If you look at most people training, especially in USAPL, bands and chains are rare. And I would use them more, I think. We use them a fair amount on deadlift. We've been playing around with them more on bench. I think I want to use them more on squat. It's hard to do when people are lifting at home, even if they do have home equipment. It's a little bit tougher, but I want to play around with them more. I think, we've used them more in the past. We go back and forth, but Westside's seen great results with them. And, I think a lot of people don't realize how many other people use them. I remember like Boris Chico talking about it's a way to sneak weight in. So people think that he does, all straight weight, 80% for fours and stuff like that. And he said he would give people 75%, but give them enough chain on there to make it 97% at the top. So they would press off the chest and be like, oh, that feels great. But then if they stopped pressing, they would miss lockout, which is something you don't generally see in raw lifting. But it teaches them to, like I said, accelerate through and make what should be an easy lift, to make sure that you keep it an easy lift instead of making it harder than it should be. That was a lot. Go ahead, Bri.
No, I mean, you kind of covered all of it. It's, I think we've used it in different phases of training throughout the years, and I like using it just to, especially, I think you kind of played around with using it leading up to meets and peaking up to meets, because you want that feeling of just a little bit, heavier weight. Maybe you're walking out your opener, with at the top, which would be your opener, but add some chains onto it. It might help you kind of prime yourself to handle a little more weight on your back. Or I think we've used it to kind of, I didn't want just to kind of not punish ticking points, but just accentuate, where we could find out where the weakest part of the lift is, and just be able to train it, and maybe not need to throw a ton of straight weight on, but just be able to hold a little heavier weight without just crushing yourself. So I like using it in all phases of training, and I think we've messed around with using it with a lot of implements, even just like kettlebells or dumbbells or any implement too, just to kind of change the lift and get better and kind of develop a skill in any kind of different position. So yeah, I like using it a lot.
Like you said, that's good input on what you said. Like one of the things I have written down as a goal for people, and we don't always push it as far to this, but the idea would be to close to a meet, our last submaximal day, I would want to see a single with your opener or your planned opener, which is going to be, depending on the person, 88 to 93%. So it's still submaximal, but it's hard. But depending on what that is, have the rest of it up to the planned third in chains. So like I said, maybe just for easy math, let's say we're going to put 91 pounds on the bar, and we're going to have 9 pounds of chain. So it's going to feel like 91 off your chest. So you're like, okay, as you lower, you're lowering more than what your opener is until it kind of gets down. But then, you've got a little bit of that extra load. So now you start to press, you're pressing that opener, but you're locking out your third attempt. I think that gives some people a little more confidence going in, that they moved their opener and locked out their third, that on meet day it'll be there. And it just makes it feel a little bit better. Like you said too, we've used that in other things where I love it on machines, like a machine chest press, throwing the bands on, because the machine, because of the system, it feels the same all the time. So the weight at your chest and the weight at lockout feels exactly the same, but you're stronger at lockout. So we can add that band on there and make it harder through the full range. So you're still getting all that work off the bottom, but then as you get stronger, you can lock out more. The band's really kicking in. You're getting a little bit better workout. Like I said, it doesn't let you ease up on reps. So I think it makes it a little bit harder. And then we said, like, with sticking points, like, you know, let's say like a big sticking point for people is like mid shin for deadlift. Either the bar starts to drift away or they just get stuck. That's the point where you should get stuck if technique is on, because the bars, your leverage point is your weakest at that point. So that's a common place. So that's one where, like, we'll throw some chains on. So I'm trying to have you speed through that spot, just blast through that sticking point. But then when you go to lock out, we've got another 80 pounds of chain on there, and you broke through your sticking point because it felt lighter, but then lock out, you're like, holy shit, that was heavy. And maybe it was heavier than what you can normally lock out because the chains allowed you to kind of finish a bigger lift. Bands, same idea. Like I said, we haven't done it as much with bands. I think in the future we're going to see a little bit more of that. I've got lots of ideas with that, and Westside has shown a lot with that. I love Westside stuff, so like I think that's great. But yeah, like I said, I think that's something that, like, people don't. They're probably using it now because, like I said, for home training, that's one of the, like, people have bands, they're easy. So at least it's adding some resistance. But I like to see them go back to the gym and actually attach some of it to the bar and see how it changes the feel. I think you can get a lot out of it.
I think it just kind of like makes you take the weight more serious sometimes too. Like I've seen it, people like walking out of weight with chains in the bar too, and it's like a weird foreign feeling. But if you have more weight at the top, you might treat the lifts more seriously. You might put more effort into it just because you're primed for just this heavy weight on your back or like over your chest. It just kind of makes you take the weight more seriously. I don't know, it's like a reflex of having it, but like I've had way better. I've produced so much more force off my chest with chains on the bar sometimes with just straight weight just because, like, fuck, it's way heavier at the top. So
yeah, you have to be faster because, like I said before, like if you're not, you're gonna, when you hit that sticking point, especially the bands are gonna pull you back down. The chains are gonna slow you down to a point where you can't accelerate anymore. But the bands are actively trying to decelerate you. So you have to blast through. You have to put more force in. You can't put 80% force. You have to put 100% force, or you're in trouble. So yeah, like I said, I love that because a lot of people they'll coast. They'll get to the point where they know they can finish the rep and they'll just finish it and not put the same effort in. Yeah. Where, like I said, you throw chains or a band on and all of a sudden they miss a lift that they should have hit. So I think that helps a lot. And like I said, like, yeah, walking it out, you walk out with 100 pounds of chain on there, you're like, this sucks. But it's 100 pounds of chain. So that means when you're at the bottom, and maybe it's going to feel like 20. So the bottom, you're going to be able to blast out of there. So you can probably lift super maximal weights, but at the bottom, you're not lifting, it depends on what you load it. Like at the bottom, you might be sub-maximal, but at the top, you're above. So that's something I'm really intrigued by all the time too. Like, if we can throw enough on there, and we'll probably need to buy more chains for some people, but like if we can throw enough on there where at the bottom, maybe it's 80-85%, but at the top it's 105. Now, at least it teaches you that you have that finishing strength. So missing a lift isn't necessarily because you can't lock it out. It's because you can't accelerate through some point earlier in the lift. If you get it far enough, everyone's going to lock it out if they get far enough. But it's that when you get to that point, that, maybe 2 inches out of the hole or 2 inches off your chest and acceleration just shit the bed. And now you can't move. Where if you can learn to blast through that, and that's what like Dave Tate talks about all the time. If you can blast through it, then you should be able to finish the lift. Now, I don't think that speed work in of itself is going to help a ton with the strength. I think it's just going to help you apply your strength better. So like, if you can bench press 400, but you're only putting in 350 of force because that's all you need to do, it's going to feel like a hard lift. But if you're trying to press 400 pounds when it's only 350 on the bar, you're going to crush it. And that's what I want to see. I don't want to see sub-maximal weights done in a difficult manner. unless there's a specific reason for it. But very rarely do I want to slow you down or, like I said, make you use less force to make an easy lift difficult. I want to like what you said, like, you know, you're putting that mental effort into of treating it because it's heavier. Like Ed Cohn would say, like, treat your lightweights heavy and your heavyweights light. Like get in the habit of taking out 135, but acting like it's 405 bench.
Yeah.
So, you know, I hate when people like get up there to squat and they unrack the bar or 135 or 225 or whatever it is, and their walkout's different, their setup's different, their breathing's different because it's light. So it's not, they're like, I don't have to worry about it. That's when you get hurt. You don't get hurt. I don't see a lot of injuries at like max weights, because at max weights, you're paying attention to every single step of the way, where the bands or the chains kind of make everything feel like a maximal weight. So you're right. It does make you focus on the task at hand better than just moving 135. And then, like, if you look at like Matt Wenning talks about, like on the velocity trackers, which I know a lot of people have, like that your speed work should be at 1 meter per second per rep, which if any of you have tried that is holy shit fast. I'm pretty sure I can do that with like 20%. More than 20%, I'm not so sure I can move at a meter per second. So how many people are not lifting to their potential because they're slow? And again, I don't think like just doing speed work is going to be the end all be all. We did this years ago where we did everyone did a speed, like several speed blocks to try to get faster. And what we did was we got really good at moving lightweights fast.
Yeah.
But we didn't necessarily get stronger. But that's because I took the idea from Westside, but I didn't do what Westside did, which is 1 day strain, 1 day fast. So when I added it more to like the heavy days, we got a lot better effect out of it. And it's another thing, like, again, it's submaximal. So it's one way I use it is like it primes you for that heavy day because you're not as beat up from it. Instead of going heavy all the time, it gives you like a little bit of a back off, almost a way to like deload without deloading, before having to go into the next thing. So I like that a lot. Like I said, that's why I think I want to use it a little bit more. We use it a lot on deadlift days. Bench and squat, we don't use it as much, but I want to add it a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you just hearing, like, I know one of Dave Tate's big thing is just like, you need to learn how to strain. Like our sport is straining. Like you have to learn how to do, like, move under maximal loads. So it's tough because you can periodize that however you want, but if you're constantly overloading with straight weight, you're gonna hurt yourself. So I think it's just it provides overload, but it teaches you the skill of treating weight, like treating it how it should be treated. You should be training maximally, but it doesn't have to be maximal weight. So I think just learning the skill of doing that and keeping that in your training, I think Bands and Chains just kind of bring that in. So.
And that's that leads a little bit more into, like, you know, Dave being coming from Westside, like that leads a little bit more into the Westside idea of, like, I'll try to use some of the percentages that we use. Like, you know, high bar, I generally assume it's going to be about 10% weaker than your low bar. I assume that safety squat bar is going to be another 10 to 15% weaker than your high bar. So let's say you're a 500 low bar squatter, then high bar, I'm thinking you're around 450, and safety squat bar, for easy math, let's say you're around 400. So I could have you do a max effort safety squat bar, and you can be using 400 pounds, which it's still a max effort. It's still, you still have to strain, you still have to work for it, but it's 100 pounds less than what you would be doing if it was, a low bar squat. At the end of the day, like, people realize if they branched out a little bit more, that absolute load matters a ton. The relative intensity of those two lifts, that might be 100% of your safety squat bar max compared to 100% of your low bar max. So relative, it's the same difficulty, but it's still 100 pounds less, and that absolute load matters a ton. When you see, like, when you take these guys that are deadlifting 800 pounds, that takes more out of them than the smaller women that are pulling 400. Even though for the women it's a full-on max, most of them are going to recover quicker from that 400 max than some of these heavyweight guys are doing from an 800 max. The absolute load matters. So accommodating resistance lets us lower that absolute load, but feel like it's more. So like I said, it's another way to the way I program at least, and like, so I like Westside, but we don't follow Westside, is that we can keep training without taking time off. For all of you guys that are like that, you know, this is the longest time off you've had with me ever, because we don't deload. Like, we deload 1 week before a meet, 1 to 2 weeks after a meet, depending on how you feel after the meet, and then we train. So we don't deload often, or ever, really. You know, like I said, like if there's not a meet, like I won't peak you because if you're not competing, and we'll kind of reset and go back and build our way up again. But you know, there will be some easier days, but there's no deloads. And part of that is by using different absolute loads, and accommodating resistance helps a ton.
So what is the circumstances in which you would avoid using bands and chains for like a certain athlete? Or like, is there a reason why you wouldn't use it for some people versus other people?
I mean, almost for everyone. If you're super new and your strength level is very low, then we probably won't use it because you might die. You kind of have to have that technique get dialed in enough, and need to have enough strength. So to give an example, like usually Westside will tell you that for benching, it's the minis, so the red bands, and you double it over the bar. And I have no idea what the tensions are. I know there's a couple of different people that have done the math and that have done tensions. I don't know what they are. But they talk about that they always use the minis. Well, a lot of people can use the minis all the time. Like, Brian, you'd be fine using the minis. But if you're like a 150, 160 bencher and you put the minis on, you're probably going to eat the bar. Even at 50%. Like, you know, you're talking 75, 80 pounds in the bar, but it's going to add 20, 25 to the chest, and then enough at lockout that you might not be able to lock it out. So at that point, we do have the micro minis, the thin orange bands. That helps a lot. We can use those. But if you're not strong enough to move it, then that's one, obviously. And if your technique is a little off, because the bands are going to really, they're gonna magnify anything wrong. You know, if you get forward, they're really gonna just rip you in like out of position because they're pulling. So we got to make sure that your technique's right. Same thing with the chains. Like the chains, and we try to make sure the chains are always on the ground a little bit, so they don't swing. But when you move, they are going to sway a little bit, and they make you stabilize more. So if you're not good at stabilizing yet, either through, you know, just your core stabilization or being, you know, and knowing how to like wedge under the bar and crank into and get tight, then we might not use that stuff because it's going to get sketchy pretty quickly. If your joints are really beat up, now I know I said before, like this does help with your joints, but like if you're really beat up, that extra tension can add to it. So then we might back off then. But then I'll probably back off off a speed work anyway, and we'll do more just like volume work at a slightly lower intensity to get that working instead of trying to like accelerate through, which might beat up your joints. So that's probably the only times I think that we won't use it. You know, if you're thinking like time wise in a program, like I'll definitely do it at the beginning for speed work. And like Brian said, I'll do it, you know, a week or two out from a meet to get that feel of it. So we'll use it like throughout an entire training block. But yeah, I think you get probably like the easiest way to say is that you got to have like a minimum strength level. You know, like the chains that we use at the gym, I do have big and small ones, that helps, but the bigger size chains are 22 pounds a chain. So you load one per side on bench. At lockout, maybe it's going to be 35 pounds because I said some's on the ground, but the bar is 45. That's another 35. If you're not ready for that, like, you know, if you're a 100-pound bencher, it's still like fairly hard to top. And if you put 80 pounds in the bar, it's way over your max. Where like for Brian, if we put 80% in the bar, and he's got 325 on for bench, and I put on a chain on each side, it's still only 360 for him. So 90%, but like, 80% off the chest, 90% of the top, he's going to be fine with that. But a weaker lifter, like I said, someone who's like maybe under a red plate, like they're going to feel that real fast. And putting the lighter weights on, like the lighter chains we have are about 6 pounds a chain. I think it's so light, it probably doesn't matter. At that point, just get stronger.
Yeah, I think
Dave says you can't flex bone. Like you just got to build some muscle and get stronger.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's just a matter of like some people don't need it yet. I think the only time I think that like I hesitate to put it in is if like it would suck that happened, but if people are like are in a time crunch or like they need to get in and out, or it's like a quick workout, like that's the only time, because it does require some setup or some people don't have access to it. But in a perfect world, and if the technique and strength is there, I'd like to